Happy lunchtime, everyone. I think we are now on Facebook. Hello, talented people. It is nice to be here again. It's Wednesday lunchtime. I can't believe how quickly that has come around from our last week's session on production management. And now we are here to talk parenting and mumming it in telly. So welcome along, everyone. I can't quite believe we've all made it on time. It's 1 o'clock. I mean, that must mean we're like the meisters of juggling, right? So this session is all about career paths in TV, and the brilliant guests that I have here, who I'll introduce in a minute, are all mums of small people and owners of successful careers in telly. And we thought it would be a brilliant idea and a brilliant opportunity to just chew the fat about how that worked, at what point we had our kids, how that has affected our career, share any sort of mistakes or sort of questions and concerns that we had. Not that we know all the answers, obviously these are all our opinions, we should hasten to add. But yeah, it's lovely for you to come along. I know it's a very tricky time for a lot of people still, some people working from home, some people not working at all. So we are very pleased that Talented People has the capacity to put on these sessions for you guys just to join and feel involved and connected. So please say hello in the comments and do address some questions to us all. I'll keep an eye on questions and we will chuck them at the panel, and I'll answer some too. So welcome along to our guests. We have Jackie Waldock. Hello, Jackie. Jackie is a brilliant exec producer, super experienced in factual and documentaries, access docs, things like Hospital and The School That Tried to End Racism. We have Natalie von Herter. Hello, Natalie. Natalie was the head of specialist factual at Knickerbocker and is now freelance execing. And Jenny Popplewell. Hi, Jenny. Jenny is an exec and a director of amazing projects like American Murder, The Family, Next Door, and is now at Raw. So I thought I would firstly start by describing sort of my route quickly up through telly and motherhood, and then sort of ask each of our guests to outline theirs as well before we sort of delve into some of the subject matter. So I started sort of early 20s as a runner on various things like Big Brother and Fame Academy, and quite empty stuff actually compared to sort of later on in my career. Worked my way up through sort of researcher, AP, producer, PD, and then got married and had babies at that point where I was just starting to go for interviews for series producer roles. And then I found that quite tricky after my first child was born to get back in and knowing whether to still be going for SP jobs or to be going back to PD jobs. So I tried to do PD roles, but found that challenging because of the last minute nature of shoots and needing to drop everything to go and shoot something in Edinburgh tomorrow and childcare. So I also felt that I was slightly compromised in what I was able to do, and that I didn't want to stay late and make those phone calls when I wanted to get home for bedtime. And I don't think there was as good kind of flexible working nature or mentality as there perhaps is now. So that's when I sidestepped into talent and set up Talented People. So in a way, I dropped out of production, partly because of my personal situation and family life, which is an annoying sort of statistic on my part now when I'm trying to find brilliant female PDs and SPs who don't have families. But it worked really well for me, and I love what I do now. So that was all good. So I wondered if I could then start with perhaps Jackie. Do you want to give us a summary of your situation as you came up through your career and when you had kids?
Yeah, I hope you can hear me because I've just realised the washing machine is taking off in spin motion right now. Oh, really great timing. So yeah, I came at it slightly differently. I didn't come into telly till my early 30s. I was working in youth work and social work until my late 20s, but was for some bizarre reason desperate to make documentaries. So went to film school, was very lucky to go to film school. Came out in my kind of early 30s. So at that point, children were still not kind of on my radar at all, because I was thinking, oh God, how do I start a career in this business? Help. So I'm probably a bit strange in that I then, I worked my way through research, producer, director. I was a shooting PD for a while, and then became an SP. And it was only on my third my third SP role, actually, that I became pregnant, by which point, and I am very strange, I was 46. So, so it's a bit of a strange story, really. Yeah.
Okay, no, I think there's all different sort of scenarios. I definitely know some people who were APs when they had kids. So actually that would be interesting to hear from anybody here who's had children and younger as well. So that's sort of one side of it, Jackie, thank you. Jenny, how about you?
Yeah, I started in TV like you in my early 20s, runner, researcher, AP, producer, shooting PD, and I was shooting PD for a number of years, and then had babies at 31 and then twins at 33, and realised that I wasn't going to be off on location for long periods of time because I had 3 little ones at home waiting to see me, and went to Knickerbocker Glory as an exec when I did return to work, so that I could oversee and help as someone who's made films and shot, just to help other directors understanding what it's like in the field, and offering, advice in the edit, but also learnt my ropes. That's how I was learning to exec, was aware that, you are thrown at the deep end, but and just felt a responsibility to the crew to help them, because I've been there and knew what was good feedback, what was useful feedback, and what was, throw it up in the air, see where it lands, wasn't useful. So yeah, I did that for 5 years, and then have just returned to directing because my little ones are now 6 and 8, and I think, they're fine. Yeah, I'm off. So I'm back now.
That's so interesting though. We'll come back to that. I think that you went into sort of execing quite almost like as a more junior exec, learnt tons, but then you've gone back to directing, so more hands on when you actually can. Okay, cool. Yeah. Natalie, tell us a bit about your route up, and when did you have kids?
So I started, I think, early 20s, like 21, and I did research at AP, directing, PDing. I was a shooting PD for a while. I didn't love it, actually. And I kind of quite quickly went to senior producer. And I had my first kid, I guess, when I was 31. And then took sort of, I don't know, about 4 months off after that. And I'd already been in the edit, obviously, and I just went straight back into the edit after my first kid. I didn't want to PD again. So I did sort of lots of edit producing and troubleshooting in the edit. So stuff that had kind of gone a bit awry, I then kind of came on and managed to work across a few things, as in a few eps. And then I had twins as well. And when I went back to work after that, I went in as an exec, which I really enjoyed. I think that was definitely sort of where I was always gonna go.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can see exec as a good job to have when you've got kids, because, by supposed definition of the role, depending on how hands-on or not, I suppose, the job is, you're supposed to have that oversight, to have the slightly more regular hours, that I guess, where you can sit back and advise and consult with the years of knowledge that you have accrued and experience, rather than actually on the floor, on the shoot, up till midnight, all of those things. So I think lots of people sort of see that as a good place to be when you're having a family. I suppose it's how do you get there before you to then have kids at that point, whereas I think lots of people want to have kids before that, and then what do you do? So I've already had a couple of questions earlier in the week actually about it that I'll put to you guys. So if anyone watching has questions about the point you're at in your career, chuck out at us, and we'll see sort of whether we can give any thoughts on our own experiences. I suppose what I want to come back to now is that point where you're pregnant and you're trying to get work. I suppose it depends if you were in a staff job already at that point or a contract already. I wasn't, or I was coming to the end of a contract. And I remember going for interviews about, I think I was 5 months pregnant. And I really struggled with whether or not to tell the interviewer that I was pregnant. I wasn't showing that much. It was my first child. So it was and it was winter, sort of baggy jumper time. But I really struggled, and I remember sitting in a Starbucks, as you do, in the old days anyway, having an interview with someone, and I felt really deceitful, and I didn't know whether to say, and it was only for a 3-month contract anyway, so I knew it would probably be fine. But in my head, I was concerned that he wouldn't go with me, because in case he wanted to extend someone, or he wanted to think of this person as more long term. So have you got any memories of being pregnant and either having interviews or bringing up that conversation at work? Anyone?
I wasn't pregnant for interviews. I was actually making 24 hours in A&E when I became pregnant. I was nervous about telling the bosses, so to speak, you know, because I wanted to finish the contract, but they were incredibly supportive, actually. I think when I was most scared was when I'd had the baby and was trying to get back into work. And then I was really frightened of saying to people, well, actually, I have a very small child and I'd quite like to do 4 days a week, please. And that's when I think I really found it very scary. You know, what do you say? What don't you say? How honest are you? And I was still SPing then, you know, so in some senses I was going for jobs where, you know, obviously I was at a higher level, but it's still really scary knowing that SP is one, I think, the hardest job in telly, and knowing that, you know, I was going to be absolutely thwacked with the hours. To be, you know, how honest do I be about having a small child and needing and wanting to see him and get home, you know, really tricky. Really tricky.
How did you bring it up though, Jackie?
Well, in the end, I took the view that, you know, I've spent, well, you know, many years trying to get pregnant and finally had him. So I do actually want to see him. So I've always been super, super honest, really honest, and just said, look, this is what I would like. I have a child. I'd like to do 4 days a week. If that's not possible, I understand, you know, and obviously a lot of jobs, it ends up being 5 days a week. You know, you might start at 4, but it rumbles in and more. I suppose, again, being at that point, I was an SP, I felt like I could say that because I was in a position I perhaps slightly more power, if you like, you know, if they wanted me. But I still found it really nerve-wracking. But I also felt very strongly politically that people need, you know, if they want to keep people in the industry, especially women, you know, and the older I get, the more I realise how many women have disappeared from this industry at a certain age. You have to be really honest. And if a job doesn't want you on that, then you have to walk away from it. And that's really difficult. And I have walked away from a couple of jobs who said, oh, no, it must be 5 days a week, you know, absolutely can't do it. Whoa. You know, and it's like, well, sorry, I'm gone.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wonder whether this current situation, awful though it is in a pandemic, has perhaps made that slightly easier in terms of flexibility, because I do think people can see that you can work from home. It does work okay. Jenny, do you remember being pregnant and telling work, or were you freelancing at that point?
Yeah, no, I was staff with my first. I remember I'd been staff there for, I want to say 3 years. And I told them, and I was making gypsy weddings at the time and was quite key for obviously the casting part of that and the access. I mean, they were all, you know, the bosses were lovely. You know, they said like, congratulations and I hope you return. And I thought I would, but then as soon as I had, that was my first, as soon as I had my first, I wasn't in a rush to go back. And I was like, actually, we'd made it work with me and my husband and the work that he was doing, that we were fortunate that we could wait a little bit longer, not much longer, but a little bit longer. And then I fell pregnant with twins very quickly. So I went back to work actually at that point in the middle trimester of the twins and directed a car rig show. But that was ideal because I wasn't shooting. I had a DV director, so I was directing crew. And it was the car was rigged. I took that job because it was meant to be within the M25 and I could get home every night to see my 1-year-old. But very quickly, as soon as that went into production, they put an advert out on the TV for casting. And suddenly, you know, they were like, maybe you're going to Ireland, maybe you're going to Manchester. And suddenly I was not making the show that I thought I was going to make. So that was a bit disappointing that suddenly that was the first time overnights away from my 1-year-old and pregnant with twins. And that was a lot of stress. But I was totally honest. I told them, you know, there's 2 on board. And they were great. You know, there was no discrimination there at all. They were like, we'll make sure everything's safe. And at one point on the shoot, like I had some cramping and stuff. And it was all written in that I was going to pay a visit to the local hospital to check I was all right with my pregnancy. And yeah, they were really supportive. And they needed to know, you know, it's the risk assessments. It's like your colleague being supportive of actually you're really tired and not grumpy, you're just pregnant. And, you know, we're all going to have that, you know, and either men working on the production have seen their wives in similar situations, or that's your future if you're potentially, if you're a younger female on the crew as well. So I just think, yeah, everyone was very supportive on the crew. And you know, we've worked with people coming up in our career who were also pregnant or announced, and we knew, you know, it's like a conveyor belt. You see it coming in your future, and you know, like, oh, now it's my turn. So yeah, I think, be honest, I think everyone needs to know, and hope. I know that there's a, you know, an unconscious bias, and I know that people, you will lose jobs because of it, as much as people say that's great, and then later they're thinking they're not going to work the late nights, they're not going to want to do the weekends, and you will lose jobs. I mean, you'll never know you'd lost it because of it, but I think you have to be honest, and yeah, tell them. But know that there are like, you know, we hire people, and I would never not hire someone because they have a child.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is about confidence, actually, and I'm hoping that hearing from you guys, although I'm, you know, like you've said, Jenny, there's always some level of unconscious bias, and there will be situations that are difficult, but I'm hoping that from what we're saying, and that having been through it, and you know, that people will feel more confident after this, because I think a lot of it is in your head, and a lot of it is, I'm scared that, or I'm anxious about. And actually, like Jackie has said, if you state your case, you stick to what your heart is saying, that actually people will make it work for you, especially if they really want you. And we have found that, certainly when we're championing people from all backgrounds, all circumstances, you know, it just takes a bit of extra oomph and confidence, I think. Coming to you, Natalie, what's your memory of sort of being pregnant and talking to work about that, and any stories that you have about handling those situations?
So my first one, I didn't realise I was pregnant. I was working, and I think I was working in the States and Amsterdam, and it was fine. I sort of, once I finally did realise, so I'd only just got married, I was like, okay, fine. I just carried on the edit. And I do remember actually my exec saying to me, God, you're not going to be one of those awful women that just gets pregnant straight away. And me just being like, oh, shit.
Oh God, that's an awful thing to say as well. I'm laughing, but that's terrible.
Was that a male exec by any chance?
Anyway, then after my first baby, I went into the edit. I mean, it was quite hard. I was sort of troubleshooting on something, and it was you know, really, really late nights. It wasn't a brilliant experience initially. And I do remember going back and sort of feeling quite nervous about sort of saying, oh, I've got this really tiny baby, and, you know, I sort of want to be around, sort of thing. Then I got very quickly pregnant with twins like Jenny. And actually I took, I think, about 18 months off after them. And I wanted to do that because I hadn't really enjoyed it the first time, because I'd gone straight back into work. So the second time I was like, you know, I'm going to really enjoy this. Or, you know, with 3 children under 2.5, I don't know if it's enjoyment, but you know, and actually I completely agree with Jenny and Jackie, and I went back with much more confidence. Weirdly, I hadn't necessarily ascended any higher. In fact, I'd kind of gone backwards, because I'd been SPing, and then I'd senior producing, and then I'd gone into sort of edit producing. So it wasn't like I'd, you know, just walked in with that same level of confidence. I'd just taken edit producing jobs because it was easier when the baby was tiny, sort of thing. And I have to say, the second time around, I was just much more honest. I just said, you know, I can work 5 days a week. I'm going to have childcare, but I don't want to work 5 days a week all the time. I don't mind if I work 3. I don't mind if I work 4. I don't mind if I work 5, but I want to have flexibility. And I know I can do it. You know, I just absolutely a dead cert about how I could make it work. And I didn't mind working in the evenings to make up time, but I wanted to occasionally be able to pick them up from nursery. And I think people respond quite well to that. That was, I certainly did when I was in the position as well of hiring people. I wanted to know that people were thinking of how they were going to cover their bases, but I knew I was going to be really understanding, because I wanted to have that same understanding from my employer. So I think if you're honest, then that's a really good starting place, because it's not sort of, I think people don't like it if they feel like you're sort of winging it, you know. I think people are always understanding, or I was always really happy to be understanding, and I think people are always happy to be understanding to me if you're just honest. This is what my situation is, this is how I'm going to kind of cover it. And accidents happen and things go wrong, but as long as you're clear, then I think people are fine about that. And I've been in positions where, you know, I've hired pregnant people, I've got no issue with that whatsoever. And I've also been approached by someone about a job who was pregnant. You know, she was pregnant and she really wanted to do the job. And I've also had a really clear, honest conversation with her and said, are you sure? You know, it's going to be be doing this, that, everything, you know, because you also want to be responsible. And I think that's something else that's really important, because you're not saying I'm not hiring because you're pregnant. You're saying you can have this job, absolutely, but are you sure? You know, and I think that is also something that as a mum is a really good thing to be able to sort of offer someone, to be able to, or a parent, sorry, is to be able to sort of say, you know, shit, the night's going to be quite late, you know, or whatever, because people have got to, I think that's something for a first time parent that's quite important to be able to sort of say, you know, it's, you might get home at 2 a.m. and then have to wake up at 4 when they wake up, you know. So I think it can work really well if you're honest, people are honest back. I think it's, you're showing that, everyone is showing that, you know, we're going to help you out, we're going to accommodate anything that kind of comes your way, sort of thing.
I think that is all headline stuff, is honesty, because I'm thinking now about situations that we've had at Talented People, where some people have said, yeah, oh yeah, I've got a 4-month-old, and I, you know, definitely, I don't mind, I can go to Ireland and whatever. And you just have to, I suppose we're lucky in that, because we're the middle person and we can have these really, you know, personal chats with people before we put them forward. We can do that interrogation of, you'd be brilliant for this job. Are you really sure? Because what you don't want to do is waste a production company's time by them pulling out at the last minute. It's far better to say, do you know what, actually that's not for me, or it absolutely is, and as Jackie sort of said, this is my plan that I have in place. And then everybody can go forward in confidence. Whereas if you're a bit wavery, or yes, I think so, and then pull out, it's much, much worse. And yes, absolutely, about go on.
Sorry, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I'd agree with a lot of what Natalie and Jenny said, and Natalie's point about being really honest, you know, now execing and you know, like at SPing as well, hiring a lot of people, being really honest with that person about the person who's pregnant, who's got children, about how full on the job is. I'm not trying to put them off, but as a parent, I'm trying to say, you know, this is the reality of it. So, you know, I just want you to think carefully about that, because it is, you know, it's a beast. So I want you to understand the parameters of that. I really want to hire you, but, you know, and I think one thing as a help from the get-go, I had a really trustworthy babysitter who right from day one, you know, if I was late or got into trouble, I mean, my other half's in the same business, he's an editor. So, you know, we are really juggling, even though we've only got one child, our hours, you know, can be ferocious sometimes. I always had someone who I could call and say, God, I'm really sorry, I'm going to be another hour, or, you know, I think that is just has been a lifesaver for us, actually. Having that one person we could always rely on, who would be there, and we trusted them if we got into trouble, you know, hours wise. Because I might, as I said, you know, I started off saying, yes, I only want to do 4 days, and I've always stuck to this kind of thing, you know, being really honest, as the other two said. But of course, sometimes it doesn't work out like that. You end up doing 6 days a week, or 3 days a week, or 7 days a week, or 5 nights, or, you know, so you've got to have backup. You know, you've got to have really clear, strong, trustworthy backup, because that will get you out of trouble.
Yes, backup. This is good. I like solid tips coming out of these sessions as well. So I'm writing down, you know, good solid backup in terms of childcare. And actually, we should come to some practical things that you guys remember, or wish you'd have known sort of early on, I suppose, to make your careers possible. I just want to pick up on something, actually. Thank you for comments, everybody, and I will come and read some of them out. But Amy Ruffle, hi, Amy. And actually, funnily enough, this is something we were talking about in preparation for this session with us guys. It is very interesting how it's still shocking, says Amy, that these are questions we ask mums and not dads with young children. Like we were saying, actually, you know, because this session is women, that's why we've entitled it Mums in Factual, and we can talk from our own personal opinions. And we wanted to talk about being pregnant and those sort of the very early days. But of course, these things apply to dads as well. But it's interesting that we don't ask these questions to dads with young kids, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, going back, like, it's just been a given that me and my husband are going to juggle childcare, like we're co-parenting. So now I'm directing. When I was directing American Murder, I said to him before I went back into it, like, I was part-time execing / pretty much full-time, and he was kind of full-time designer. And then I said, I want to do this film for a year. So then we switched roles. He became part-time and I did the full-time. And it wasn't like, I didn't want to feel like I have to ask permission, or like, we both have children, and I don't ask my colleagues that are guys, God, how do you juggle having children and doing this? So if a male director is doing that role, then why can't a female director also be the breadwinner on that occasion? I know that's not true for everyone, and everyone's got different financial, come from a different place. But for us, we were seen as equal in our finances, and then I felt like I'd already taken a number of years out for pregnancies and babies, that you just want to have that dialogue early to say, we're both going to go back to work, and I'm not going to quit my career. I've spent years getting to where I am. I'm not going to walk away from it. So when I'm hiring, I'm very excited to hire female crew. I'm very excited to hire mums back. I'm open to like job shares. I want to support them back, because it shouldn't be about, it's already hard enough. It shouldn't be about finding a problem. It should be about like, what's our solution and what's our way around it, and that's on us to help them do that, rather than to be like, it's going to be a long day. I think we need to say like, okay, what if you stop work at 5? Would you mind doing that? Should we not put your out of office on? Like, let's deal with this. Like, I think you need to be able to be a mum or a dad and still have a career, and we can't. And I know they're saying like, is that have it all? But there is a have it all, and I think we've all seen that with COVID, is that suddenly kids are at home, mum and dad are like, oh my God, how do we do this? How do we juggle? And suddenly it's a leveler, isn't it? Everybody's in that role. And I'm hoping on the other side of this, people that have previously said, oh, I hope this job will let me work from home for 2 days a week, where previously people have said, no, we need everyone in the office. I'm hoping now a lot of people have been like, well, yeah, we all did it. We all did it for a year, and we know you get the work done. We're all very much, we're not clock in and clock out industry. We're results. Everyone, it doesn't matter if it took you 5 minutes to find a contributor, or if it took you 5 days to find a contributor, you're going to find that contributor and you're going to get the job done. And we're like reputation based. Nobody's like pretending to work from home and not really working from home. Like, we are like driven, and that is the industry. And I think that there needs to just be trust from employers that mums and dads are going to get the job done, whether they've got little ones around or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And shout to Lou Patel, who's watching as well, who runs Show My Telly Job and is a massive campaigner for flexible working. She's just saying that we're currently in a period of enforced flexible working because of COVID, and that we just really hope that it's sort of almost up to us to stay confident and keep campaigning against this, and remembering that this works when things go back to whatever normal is, and then the employers kind of almost have the option to say yes or no to flexible working. So I think that's
really, really important. We've showed in this last year, despite the nasties, that we can do, we can deliver. I've delivered 8 episodes of Hospital with all, okay, of course we're shooting in the hospitals, but we've had to do all the pre-production, the post-production and the editing flexibly at home. I'm not saying it's easy, but we can do it. So let's not just slide back into everybody has to be in an office. I really, really hope we can keep hold of that.
Yeah, here. I've got a question for Natalie from Emily Ward. Thanks for your question, Emily. Going back to you talking about hiring, Natalie, she says, what sort of jobs have you offered pregnant women? Because she's just wondering what the realistic job options are if you don't have a huge amount of edit experience, especially in this climate.
I have done shooting PD roles, I have offered that, I wouldn't think twice about that, and a lot of kind of more sort of producers. So rather than be like series producer, and I had quite a few really amazing women who hadn't actually really gone down that shooting PD route, because I do think the kind of golden thing is I want to be an SP. That's a lot of kind of women, I think, young parents kind of think, okay, well, that's going to be a job that is doable. I can still be editorial. That's the next stage to get to. And I think that's really valid. But I think there's another way to do it without just being a PD, which is, to be a really, really good producer, and to kind of almost go from that AP level to kind of being an AP across the series, and then sort of not the series producer, but a producer across the series. And we kind of had quite a lot of that. I think that, it's all more of a route that kind of sometimes comes up when people are doing it from casting. But actually we started using it a little bit more on stuff that wasn't just casting in the traditional sense of things, but more contributor finding, and then keeping an editorial across the series. And I would always say to them, you don't have to then kind of think, oh God, I haven't really gone down that PD route. You can still get a good career and find projects where being a really, really good producer is such a valid skill. And if you are working with a team, if you're a producer on one of those projects and then you're working with a team of slightly, you know, more junior APs and researchers, you are then learning how to run a team. And from there, yes, you've got to get edit experience somehow. But there are series out there, I think, where if you've been a really good producer and you've been across a series to understand how that series is knitted together, you can get into an edit to get that sort of editorial side of things. People will take some chances on you. Again, if you're honest, I think people, it can't be on everything. It probably has to be a formulaic. It's not a first series of something, you know, it might be a returning series, but I do think people will take chances on that. And there is a different route to kind of getting up to a slightly more senior position without really killing yourself to be a PD if that hasn't happened for you, or if you feel like you're only getting offered shooting roles and shooting roles aren't really working for you, or whatever it is. But I have hired shooting PDs who are pregnant, and you know, you accommodate for that. Again, I think it's, you empower them. You sort of say, is this the role you want? Absolutely. You know what they're capable of. If you know, you can sense that, then you say, okay, well, this is the reality of the role. I'm very happy. You clearly got the CV. This is what we can do for you to kind of make sure that you're well looked after and safe, etc., etc. And then I think, you know, you work on trust, don't you?
You really do. And I remember being really pregnant and shooting, and the bump being an exceptional place to perch the camera, which was, you know, it was great. My shoulder was a bit buggered, so yeah, it was really good. And it was amazing, actually, the reactions you would get from contributors. I found it quite a kind of, I don't know, icebreaker, rocking up really pregnant with a camera. It's very leveling, as is this entire situation right now, I think, for everyone. I can't remember who posted it, but in the Telly Mums Facebook group, if you guys are not there, it's excellent. Cheryl at ITV runs it. Somebody posted a meme, God love memes at the moment, saying, can I do this job, Mr. Employer? Hell yeah, I've raised and homeschooled 2 kids under 3 during 2 lockdowns. Like, you know, I think take an essence of that. And if we can do this, and this isn't really flexible working, as Joe Wolf is sort of saying, this is actually flexible in certain ways, but actually worse than flexible, because we're doing several jobs at once that are not just in telly. We're like trying to raise and school kids. So basically, you're all doing an awesome job, and don't worry about anything else. But no, in terms of coming back to point, I wanted to bring up a question from Ruth Overend. Ruth, hope you're watching. Thank you for your email this week with your questions. She wanted to know, also it's a little thing about her. She's 33, has 3 shooting PD credits. Is it now a race against time for me to further establish myself at this level to get into the edit and SP before I consider having a baby? So with the biological clock ticking and COVID slowing down career progress, what sort of wisdom do you have about sharing things like your age, job role, timings? I mean, I know that's tying together a lot of what we've touched on, but I think that will probably be the biggest concern of most people watching this. Has anybody got any advice?
I would just say, you've got to, at that point, I think you should really separate your personal life and your work, because you know, there's putting off baby career roles where you later just think like, why did I wait, or should I have waited? Or like, I think the time to have a baby should be when you are personally ready to have a baby, and not whether you've been a PD or whether you've got formal credits. I think or they're a surprise. You know, there's no technically there's never a good time to have a baby, full stop, whether you're in TV or any career. Like, there's always a house build, or a, you know, just want to build a conservatory, or we need another bedroom, or whatever. There's always a problem. So they're always going to appear at random times. So I'd say just when you're ready, and then whatever stage you are in your career, when you come back, you're going to make it work for you. So don't worry about, I just need to get here. You know, like you said, people are having babies as researchers and APs. Like, we shouldn't worry about constantly getting to the next one. And actually, like, TV's a pyramid. So it's actually, as you are on those slightly more junior rungs, there's more roles. And then when you get up to exec, then suddenly you're like, oh, it's great, I made it to exec. But then there's like, you know, a shed load of execs and only a certain number of roles left, unlike researchers where there's loads and you can never find enough. So I think there's always pros and cons to both of those, like climbing those rungs as the roles get less. So I say have the baby when it's right, and figure it out when you get back, because it's always changing. Like COVID, who would have, you know, I know plenty of people that have just getting ready to come back from maternity and COVID struck. So technically they're also, you know, a drama. So just do it for you, I'd say.
Yeah, don't overthink it, I think, Ruth. Exactly as Jenny said, there's never a great time. And I also think you reevaluate and you have a new perspective after you've had children, and you don't know that, do you, when you haven't had them yet, obviously. So I think you feel different, and you'll probably come back with more confidence, and you might be a bit wobbly about where to go and what to say, but it will work out. Look at all these amazing women here who've made it work. It's tricky, but yes, just go for it and things will pan out. Tina Curley, hello Tina, thank you for your question. She says, I'd be interested to know, if you can't go back as the role you did as a shooter, but you still want to work in the industry that you love, could you go towards casting? I mean, I would happily answer that and say absolutely. I mean, everything in an editorial role, that sort of, well, I know you're a PD, Tina, but at that level, that's such an easy sort of sidestep. I think, it's whether you would be satisfied doing that, I suppose. If you really love the directing element, it's a very different role. It's much more office based, which I guess could work if you're thinking about that in terms of childcare and hours. It's also something you can do remotely really easily. But I think, when you're on a shoot as a PD, it's all about people. It's all about your instinct about story. And at that sort of slightly more senior level, you'll sniff out that story and you'll be able to pitch it to your bosses as the casting person, very eloquently. So I think that's a really legitimate way to go. Do you agree, ladies?
I think also you can, I think you can definitely do that, but I think nothing's forever. Like, you can sort of go into that, and then as long as you're sort of managing to sort of keep current, I don't see why you can't go back into things when you've, I think you could do PD, you could do edit producing, you could do casting. I just think there's different ways of kind of navigating the industry, as long as you're sort of aware how transferable your skills are. And I think a lot of them are so transferable. I think it's sort of not to be held back by thinking, oh, I'll have to do this, and more, what do I want to do at this stage, and sort of not kind of shutting doors necessarily, but thinking more along the lines of, for the next 6 months, I'd like to do this. And yes, you've got to build a CV, and everyone's got to be mindful of that. But I do think it's about liberating ourselves from thinking, I can only do this because this is what I've been doing. We're all telling stories. That's what we're doing. You're telling them in a kind of visual, engaging way that relies on a team, obviously, but that's basically what we're doing. And I think it's about working out. I remember it's a bit of a sidestep, but when I worked at Horizon, everyone was like, from my school days, was like, you science, what? and actually but I felt I was telling a story, and I could tell that story. I could understand the science enough to tell a story that had the science as the backbone, but in an engaging way for other people to kind of, want to watch it. And I think that's the thing we've got to remember. We're telling stories, and our skills are transferable. Yes, we can't just hop into each other's roles and not have respect for each other's roles, but we can liberate ourselves a little bit and say, look, I know that I can transfer this skill and do this for now, and yet not feel that I've shut that door and I'm not going back there.
Yeah, and actually, something that popped into my head then, that if you've had a year off or a couple of years off or longer, and actually recently I was talking to a male PD who's had sort of 5-6 years out while his wife was having the career and he was looking after their young kids. I think one of the biggest things to remember is to stay current. You touched on that, Natalie. Watch telly, and it's very easy to just watch drama box sets, which we all love, but you really need to be watching mainstream telly, streaming service telly, but docs or entertainment or whatever those things are that you want to be working in. Keep watching them. You would be surprised the amount of people who do interviews and they get asked the question, oh, what are you watching on TV right now? And they'll just be able to reel off some box sets, Lupin and various other, Queen's Gambit. And actually, you need to stay current and appropriate for what you're working in, so that you can comment on it, and so you can talk about and talk to your peers. You won't have lost contact with all your friends and the people you've worked with. Are they still shooting on this camera? How are they remote editing? There's lots of free resource as well at the moment, and hopefully going forward. So that would be my tip anyway. I was wondering about some practical tips and advice. How do you guys make it work when you're in full flow contract? What's your setup? So Jackie said amazing babysitter from the word go, who you can call on and you can have sort of later nights. That's really key, and that you've juggled with your husband's full time as well. So is your child in school now, Jackie, and then you have babysitter around the edge?
Well, he would be if we weren't in lockdown. Yep. Currently kind of upstairs in the attic. Yeah, he is normally full time in school. So what we've done, I mean, I must admit, we were both working kind of full time at the same time. But recently we've been taking it more in turns to give him a bit more support. So we've been, I suppose it's, we've had to cut back a little bit, be a bit more sensible, but it's really worked for him. So we've been so last year I worked a lot because I had a lot of jobs, very luckily. This year, and my husband took over, my partner took over. And then, so we found this kind of juggling can work for us a little bit better, actually. So I think some flexibility, if you're with somebody else, it's about trying to find some flexibility between the two of you, and perhaps not both going all guns blazing all the time. Because what we found was the person who generally lost out was the little person in that.
Yeah.
Definitely the babysitter. And I have to say, if you can afford it, a cleaner.
Yeah. Jenny or Natalie, have you got any thoughts? How did you do it, and any tips?
Yeah, I went back when the twins were 1, so I had I had 3 under 2 at one stage. That just was not happening. I wasn't going to go back to work when there was 3 under 2. So I wanted to see them, like, as Jackie and Natalie agree, like TV's TV, but it'll always be there. Like, to put you and your family, and like, are you going to live to work or work to live? Like, you still have to enjoy your children. And I know a lot of people that are very panicked and saying, I can't be out too long, I need to get back. Go back still when you are financially needing to, and when you genuinely want to, as opposed to a fear of you'll never get back. My God, you'll always get back. People want your skills, and if you've done any more than 2 years in TV, I'm sure, like, it's always, and even not, like, there's always work. So there will always be someone who will want to take you back. So don't feel like you've got to rush back if you don't financially need to. But I went back when they were 1, and I had an au pair. So I've got all the children, like some kind of like orphanage. They all went into one bedroom, and the other bedroom, we had a double, that was our au pair bedroom. So we had an au pair because the childcare cost for 3 children not in school was more than my salary. So I couldn't afford that. So we went with Australia and New Zealand, back when you could travel, au pairs, and they lived with us because that was their way to see Europe and flights. So they were often off at like school holidays and summer holidays and all that. They were off traveling and seeing Europe, and I was back because the kids were out of school or taking breaks, or my husband was. But then that was an affordable way. I mean, we still paid them fairly. We weren't paying them £80 a week. We were still paying them fairly, but and money is tight when you've got that child, and it's a game changer when suddenly your children are in school. So 5, as soon as you turn 5, you've got during term times there is then wraparound care, so you can either continue. We continued with an au pair for that reason. For one, it almost worked out the same price as wraparound care for like 5 hours.
Also, it's not a massive difference, is it, with school clubs and hobbies and
And then we did this. We built a loft at that point, so we had another spare bedroom. They had their own floor and bathroom, so it was more appealing. Although advertising for 3 little ones was not appealing on a website for au pairs. That people don't want to look after 3 kids when you're 20. But we also, actually, when I did go back, Southern Rail was striking that year. So as soon as I went back that week, strikes started, and still seem to be on. If we were using the trains, I'm sure they'd still be happening. So I really struggled in that first year to get home. So I was like, I'd be at work and then my line was cancelled and I couldn't get back to my children. So that could not have come at a worse point for me returning to work. But having an au pair meant I wasn't constantly either paying, some of the nurseries pay £5, it's £5 a minute or something that you're late. It's crazy charges. So that would have ruined me as well if I couldn't get home because Southern Rail was striking. So the reliability and the reassurance that the children were going to go to bed on time in their own house. And then the au pair was like, oh, it's fine, I'm just having dinner. And they knew there was someone in the house, even if you and your husband were stranded somewhere in London because you couldn't get back on the train. You're supposed to be home at 5 and suddenly it's 7:30 and you're still... That's
horrible. I remember that sick feeling in my stomach when things like that were panning out.
So I did find au pair useful for guaranteed that someone's in the house with your children if you're stuck, and financially it worked well if you have more than one child financially works out well. And then there's nanny shares and wraparound care, and I know a lot of my friends were doing that. They were sharing a nanny for after school with other people. So some people have childcare where you just find locally, so that, you know, you can either do it with TV mums, but you can find locally people in your groups that have.
Nanny shares are brilliant. And actually we found having very good friends, we moved somewhere where there's quite a tight little community and started doing lots of, like, you know, mum and dad stuff, you know, meeting people quite early on, and that stood us in such good stead. Not that I'm just using you, any of my friends who might be watching, but it stood us in really good stead to help with pickups and, you know, regular, you know, can you take, you know, Toby on, you know, Tuesday, and, you know, I'll take Max on Thursday, and that sort of thing has been amazing. And it's for the same reason, Jenny, that, you know, if you're late or if you're really busy, they can keep them for dinner. It's no just extra couple of fish fingers in the oven, isn't it? Natalie, how have you been set up?
So my husband doesn't work in the industry and does not have a very flexible job. So it's definitely sort of me to work out the childcare, if you see what I mean, and be so we actually had someone live with us. I didn't go back the first time, you know, just when I just had my eldest. That was just a juggle. That was just a bit of a nightmare. I had a very good babysitter, but, you know, a limited amount that I could have her, sort of thing. And that was a little bit stressful. Once I had the 3, then I kind of got a bit more serious about it. And we did have someone live with us, and it was invaluable. You know, I have to say, it's sort of painfully expensive in many ways, but I have to say worth every penny. You know, I really wanted to work, and I think it was, you know, I wanted the sort of stability of it, because my husband was never going to, you know, if I was stuck, he wasn't ever really going to be able to step in. His hours were just completely prohibitive. That was just, you know, what I wanted to do. And I think we were quite lucky for the first few years. We just had, you know, we lucked out on quite a lot of consistency. Weirdly, there was a stage where it became a little bit more complicated. 2 different schools, 3 different places. You know, we did rely on a local mother as well. So we had someone live with us, but if we were stuck for pickups, she could go and help, you know, and then it was just more ad hoc hours if I needed, if I was really stuck. I think everyone was kind of okay. We kept it consistent enough. I mean, I was very, very, how do you say it? I mean, WhatsApp was my best friend. You know, I really was very, very organized. And I do think that's the sort of burden of a parent in this industry, is that you just have to be incredibly organized, quite steady about it, not panic, and just sort of, you know, childcare falls through quite often. It's not the most, it's not always as reliable as you hope it's going to be, and things do go wrong. You have a sick child and you haven't accommodated for those hours and all the rest of it, you know. But I think, again, the kind of honesty thing and always having a slight backup plan does really help. And I think proving that you're going to, I mean, is this the wrong thing to say, but sort of proving that you can do it from home when you need to. Now, obviously, we have all done that, but quite early on, I knew I was going to be working sometimes not in the office. Mm-hmm. And I just stuck to what I said I was going to do. You know, if I wasn't in the office, and sometimes I would be away, because my husband doesn't always work in the UK, I would stick to my hours even if I wasn't here, and I would just make sure that my team knew that, because I think you do have to, I think that's the thing, you know, if you're going to do the job, you've got to sort of say, I've got this in place, but also I'm going to make sure I kind of stick to what I've said I'd do. And then I think people sort of are okay with that.
Yeah, it's knowing the sort of boundaries, of which there are fewer at the moment, right? When work is bleeding into personal life, is bleeding into work, is bleeding into childcare. That's quite tricky to cut it off. But no, that's good advice.
I think consistent childcare, I would agree with Jenny and Natalie. It's just so important. I mean, we had a nanny. I went back at 10 and a half, 11 months. Mm-hmm. And my other half was working as well. So we had a nanny for Jessie's first couple of years. We only have one to pay for childcare, so that does help. And then he went to nursery, full-time nursery at kind of 2 1/4, which he loved, absolutely loved. And for us was just like, wow, this is amazing. You know, they're looking up, you know, they run 52 weeks a year or 51 weeks a year, and they go from 8 in the morning till 6. And actually the big shock came when he went to school, because suddenly it was like, oh, hang on a minute, they have all these holidays. Every 6 weeks they're having another holiday.
And it's 9 to 3. And you're like, what 3 is
Yes,
like, I'm having
9
lunch
to
at 3.
3 every day. So it was what you said as well, Kimberly. It was about building a community of parents, you know, so that we had the babysitter picking him up a couple of days. He went to the wraparound care at the school, you know, when we were at school for a couple of evenings, and then I would pick him up, or my other half would pick him up one night, you know, and it was always juggling with, you know, it's always juggling with other parents as well. And WhatsApp is a savior, absolutely. Have a parents group, you know. But I think what Natalie said is really true. I think a lot of the time it does come down to actually you as the mum, unless you've got a super organized other half. Or I find organising everything, and you have to be super ahead of everything and on it. You know, there's always, sounds mad, but you know, there's always birthday parties or presents or cards or
a fancy dress
after school, and you need kits for this or something for that or a costume for that, or you know. And I'm not saying that other halves, you know, and don't get me wrong, it's a terrible generalisation, but you do have to be even more organised than I think you are normally.
Yeah.
you
yeah,
know,
I
because
do
you're
think
juggling
being in telly does lend itself to that sort of, you know, organising head, doesn't it? You know, we know how to problem solve in TV as well. It's about story and it's about problem solving and how to make that happen. And we can absolutely do that. I'm conscious of the time. We've probably got just less than 10 minutes left. So I would like to talk about what positives parenthood brings to your career in telly, right? You know, I think we've gone over how being honest is important, and hopefully giving you guys confidence that it's possible and, you know, brilliant. But I also think, you know, people forget, you know, we're talking about the challenges here, but people forget how creative we are and actually how creative it can make you being a parent, and how you can be even better at solving problems for all of the reasons that we've touched on in other parts of this discussion. In that childcare falls down, you have to figure it out, you stay calm under pressure. All of those things can make you better at your job, I think. Jenny, can you think of anything that feels like you were better at it after you had kids when you came back to telly?
For me, it was less about managing my time, but more when I deal with access documentaries, and as soon as someone was also a parent, that, you know, usually I was bonding over, I don't know, if you're talking to someone who's like a marijuana grower, it was quite hard to find like a leveler. It was like, what should we talk about? But actually, as soon as, you know, they're a dad and you're a mum, or they've got kids, so there was that universal crossover, and I just found actually, and also I think I became more empathetic when I had a child. I didn't used to cry at scenes of, you know, someone giving birth or a child being, you know, I was obviously upset. I'm not dead inside, but I wasn't. You had moved even more once I had children. And I know people watching who don't have children, you know, that's the joke, isn't it? You're just like, oh, if anything ever happened to him, I don't know how I'd cope. But when you do have a kid, you definitely do start feeling like that, and you can see. And I don't know, I became quite protective of all contributors after having had children. I just saw them as like somebody's son, somebody's daughter, and you know, when they were saying like they're struggling or something, and you should always be aware of like contributors' mental health, I immediately saw like one of my son's future being like, oh, I hope no one's ever gonna, hope Lenny won't feel like this. How do we help? How do we support? And I think that is your responsibility. But a mothering nature, when you're looking after your team, when you're looking after your contributors, is a bonus. And obviously, dead inside, cold, heartless producers are not ideal to look after your team or to look after your contributors. So I actually felt it helped me nurture.
Yeah, so empathy and finding that common ground with contributors. Natalie, can you think of anything?
I think I definitely agree with the empathy thing. I think that can come from different sources as well, though. I think I became really efficient, just really, really efficient. And I think more decisive as a result. You know, you're sort of, you know, it becomes life sort of becomes a bit more of a schedule, and that's not for the compromise of all the good stuff Jenny says, like, you know, nurturing teams definitely becomes, you know, because you're kind of, it's like a little family, each one that you have, isn't it? But also the decisiveness and efficiency, definitely a big change once I kind of realised, you know, I've got a really busy slate, I've got this to do, I know I want to kind of be out the door by then, I'm going to just make decisions. And it didn't necessarily mean that I was making them without thought, it just meant editorially I became much more decisive, I think, much more sort of, you know,
focused.
Yeah, and I think also realistic in some ways as well, just sort of, you know, of course you want to sort of say with your budget, oh yes, go off and do that, go, you know, go and try and explore and see if we can make that happen. But sometimes you say, look, that is never going to happen for that budget, we're not going to make that work. You know, I understand the big dream that you have, but unless we, you know, we've got to give that a limited amount of time before we make a decision. And so I think I just became a little bit more efficient and a little bit more decisive.
Yeah, I can definitely empathize with that. I remember just thinking, wow, before kids, in this hour, I would never have got this amount of stuff done. Because like you say, you know, you've got to get out the door. I have to leave at 5:30 to pick up my kids by 6:30. So it's got to be done. Otherwise, I've got to pick it up later. So you just get it done. It's that saying about giving a job to a busy person, isn't it? Like if I've got one thing to do all day, I'm not very likely to do it. Like at a weekend, I meant to go to the post office Saturday morning, just didn't. Whereas on a weekday, when I've got, 100 things to do, an extra little job, it's nothing, I'll do it. Jackie, can you think of anything that you felt better at after having kids?
Well, all that you three have said, absolutely. Tick, 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 tick. I think the decisiveness, yeah, definitely. And the speed at which I can get through stuff and have to get through stuff because, I need to get on and I need to get back at a certain time and, spend some time with the little person. I think I became a lot more empathetic to the people I was hiring and the people on my teams about people who were pregnant or having children or had children. Suddenly I understood it all, and all that rubbish that I used to think in my head about, well, I just don't understand why you can't do this, that and the other, and it's like, actually, very good reason, because they don't do anything you want them to do. They are completely, they're beings unto themselves, So I think that made me actually a much better, hopefully a better person to work with, actually, because I understood a lot more. I suppose I probably wish I hadn't had him quite so late, but then on the other hand, I'm super, and that wasn't any putting it off, it was just, it took a long time and we had a lot of help. But on the other hand, I do feel very privileged that in some senses as a parent, I am having it all as, it takes a lot of compromise and it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of organisation, but it is lovely. And I think it has made me much more sensitive and empathetic to other people and their working agendas and practices and home situations, which I think can only be for the good, and I think that's what everybody else needs, everybody, some other people need it perhaps more than others, shall we say.
Yeah, and it can only reflect well in the programming that you're making and the stories that you're choosing, and as well as the team that you're hiring too. No, I understand that. It's amazing. Thank you, Jackie. I'm just going to go through a couple of comments and then we'll wrap up. But Vix Harrison, so we've mainly had positive things. Vix didn't have a great experience. She brought up the fact that she was pregnant after she got a job, and then the job was rescinded. She said she told the exec before she had it in writing because she wanted to be honest about it. Error. So I suppose, that's obviously a terrible situation. We don't, I don't know who that is. We don't need to do that, but let's hope that that is absolutely in the minority and that maybe there were other things at play. But either way, that is rubbish. Sorry to hear that. But lots of other positive things like Bridget. Hi, Bridget McGrath. She says the company she was working for when she found out she was pregnant was incredibly supportive. She found it hard getting back into TV when her daughter was old enough for her to go back to work. She found she had to fight her corner when asking for working 4 days a week and 1 day from home because most of the jobs were in London and she's based in Brighton. And she, like all of us, is curious to know how the current situation might change the flexibility of work contracts. I think we all just need to keep fighting it, keep pushing it. We've done it now, we can do it again. And Alicia Bailey, hello Alicia. She says she didn't disclose at an interview that she was pregnant because it was very early on, but she then had to disclose in a health declaration because she had to go on a shoot on location. And then it was lovely that everyone knew and everyone was really supportive and gave her what she needed and understood and much more empathetic about appointments and feeling unwell, etc. So that's amazing to hear. So I think that sort of brings us to the end. If anybody wants to chuck in a last question, that's fine. But it's been so nice to actually talk about this so openly, and I don't think there's many forums where people feel that they can speak as honestly as this. And so I really appreciate it, and everybody really appreciates it. Tina has said that we're all very inspiring women, and she hopes if it happens for her as a single mum that she can take these tips away with her. I would just say, in summary, then, it's about being honest and understanding your worth and asking for what you want, not waiting for the right point in time. Telly is a crazy career, as we all know. I think it's just, you've got to separate your personal life, as Jenny said, from your work life, and have babies when it's right for you, if you're lucky enough to. Watch telly, keep current, ask for what you want. Just know that you're going to be as creative afterwards and even more efficient and empathetic. So really, it's just about, you know, feeling positive about the whole thing and taking inspiration from these guys. And, you know, I would just say, I just really hope you guys are all doing all right. It's a nuts time out there, isn't it? And we are juggling so much. So thank you to Jackie, to Natalie, Jenny, really appreciate your time. Like, to get you guys for an hour together, I'm so thankful and grateful for that. I know how much you're all juggling with work and home life. So really appreciate it. Everybody's saying thank you. So hop onto our Facebook page afterwards, guys, and see how everybody has said very lovely things about us all. We're hosting these sessions most Wednesdays. We're trying to do every Wednesday. Sometimes it might be every other, depending on our flexible working situation and workload. So Wednesdays at 1 on our Facebook page. If we don't have your CV yet, guys, or your latest CV, please email it in, or look up the listing on our jobs board on talentedpeople.tv, and you can submit your CV there. Also, you can see all the previous sessions that we've done, which are just lovely chats like this with inspiring people on different topics, anything from edit producing to making of series. And actually Jackie was in one about hospital last year. She's done another one since, because she's a glutton for punishment, but it was amazing and we loved it. So yes, that just all that remains for me to say is stay safe, everybody. Thank you ever so much for joining us, and we will see you next week. Bye bye. Thanks, guys.